Hello and welcome to Chapter 8. This is Early Childhood Biosocial Development. What will you learn in this chapter? Do young children eat too much, too little, or the right amount? If children never climb trees or splash in water, do they suffer? Why is injury control more needed than accident prevention? Which is worse, neglect or abuse? We're going to discuss body changes, growth patterns. Children become slimmer, low BMI, that's body mass index, with noticeable changes in belly, face, and limbs. Each year from age 2 through 6, well-nourished children add almost 3 inches in height and gain about 4.5 pounds in weight. Their center of gravity moves from the breast down to the belly. Head size is almost the same, but arms are twice as long, evidence of proximal distal growth. Short and chubby limbs no longer. Siblings in New Mexico, ages 7 and almost 1, illustrate the transformation of body shape and skills during early childhood. That is in the picture to the right. All right, obesity among young children. How many childhood obesity links can you identify? Childhood obesity links include low socioeconomic status, or SES, family habits, grandmother caregiving, adoption of Western diet by immigrants, childhood stress, and parental underestimation of child weight or criticism of overweight. Encouraging changes include reduced obesity rate in young children and changes in daycare center programming. Catching up and slimming down. China has transformed its economy and family life since 1950 with far fewer poor families and malnourished children. Instead, problems and practices of the West are becoming evident, as in these two boys pictured. They are attending a weight loss camp in Zhengzhou, where the average 8 to 14-year-old child loses 14 pounds in 1 month. Indeed, obesity is a sign of poor nutrition, likely to reduce immunity and later increase disease. Continuing on with body changes, going to discuss nutritional deficiencies and allergies. Most children in developed nations consume more than enough calories, but may not get adequate iron, zinc, or calcium. Many social customs entice children to eat unhealthy sweets, which are poor substitutes for a balanced, varied diet. Gender, ethnicity, and income correlate with body fat. As for allergies, cow's milk, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, soy, wheat, and shellfish are frequent culprits. Unhealthy eating centers around sugar. Sugar is a major problem and is tied to many customs. It is found in sweetened cereals and drinks and is tied to cavities. It is problematic for children, family, and culture. And speaking of culture, how many of you have pictures of when you were young digging into some cake and you're like still a toddler? Like, that much sugar can't be good for a child that age, and yet we all do it, and parents think it's funny or cute or whatever that is. But that's an example of how culture can influence eating. The American Heart Association has recommendations: no more than 6 teaspoons daily of natural or added sugars, or about 1/3 of typical consumption. That sounds right about for me too. About 1/3 of typical consumption. Everything in this country's got sugar added to it. Allergies. 3 to 8% of preschool children have specific allergies. Many of you may also have allergies listening to this lecture right now. Most common is peanut allergies, included with the ones I mentioned earlier. They are linked to a variety of medical conditions. Diagnostic standards for allergies vary. Treatment varies and includes total avoidance of the thing that induces the allergic reaction. Medically supervised small increment exposure. The idea is that the body would get used to it or acclimate. And it may be outgrown or increase or decrease with age. Brain growth. The size of the brain. By age 2, a child's brain weighs 75% of what it will in adulthood. Extensive sprouting and then pruning of dendrites has already taken place. The brain reaches 90% of adult weight by age 6. Continuing on with brain growth. Survival of the smartest. Social understanding and emotional control develops with the prefrontal cortex as it matures. The primary reason for faster thinking is new and extensive myelination. Gradual increasing of myelination makes 6-year-olds much quicker than 3-year-olds, who are quicker than toddlers. Mental coordination. This brain scan of a 38-year-old depicts areas of myelination with various colors within the brain. As you see, the two hemispheres are quite similar but not identical. For most important skills and concepts, both halves of the brain are activated. Myelin is a fatty coating of the axons that speeds signals between neurons. Inside the brain, connecting hemispheres. The corpus callosum is the thing that connects the hemispheres. It is a long, thick band of nerve fibers, and it connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain and allows communication between them. Abnormal growth is one symptom of autism spectrum disorder and other disorders. For any of you that are left-handed, studies show that the corpus callosum is more developed in left-handed people. Lateralization. This is specialization in certain functions by each side of the brain, with one side dominant for each activity. Left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and vice versa. And speaking of handedness, left-right distinction is exaggerated. This primarily occurs after injury. Both sides are involved in every skill. The left half controls the right half, and the right side controls the left. Many cultures support only right-handedness. Our culture was once like that as well, but it seems like we've let up on that one. Alright, in this picture, she already holds the pen at the proper angle with her thumb, index finger, and middle finger, an impressive example of dexterity for a 3-year-old. However, dexter is Latin for right, evidence of an old prejudice no longer apparent here. As I said, this left-right distinction has been exaggerated, especially when broadly applied to people. No one is exclusively left-brained or right-brained, except individuals with severe brain injury in childhood who may use half of their brain to do all of the necessary thinking. Brain development, planning and analyzing. And if we're talking about planning and analyzing, that means we're talking about the prefrontal cortex, or the maturation of it. Prefrontal cortex is limited in infancy and continues to develop at least until early adulthood. In some cases, all the way up to age 26, 27. By ages 2 and 6, neurological increases are especially notable in cortex areas where planning, thinking, social awareness, and language occur. Advances in neurological control between ages 2 and 6 are evident in several ways. Sleep becomes more regular, emotions become more nuanced and responsive, temper tantrums subside, and uncontrollable laughter and tears are less common. Continuing on with the brain development and prefrontal cortex. Before maturation, the prefrontal cortex gradually facilitates focused attention and curbs impulsiveness and perseveration. This is accompanied by increased emotional regulation, which is learned. Impulsiveness and perseveration. Many young children jump from task to task and cannot stay quiet. Others persevere in or stick to one thought or action, unable to quit. Impulsiveness and perseverance are opposite manifestations of the same underlying cause, immaturity of the prefrontal cortex. No young child is perfect at regulating attention, impulsiveness, and perseveration. And these are evident in every 2-year-old child. Stress in the brain. The relationship between stress and brain activity depends on age and degree of stress. Some stress aids cognition. Excessive stress hormone levels in early childhood may permanently damage brain pathways. Balance between arousal and reassurance is needed for optimal development. All right, now we're going to discuss motor skills development. At 2 years, children can run without falling, climb out of a crib, walk upstairs, feed themselves with a spoon, and draw spirals. At 3 years, they kick and throw balls, jump with both feet, pedal a tricycle, copy simple phrases, walk downstairs, and climb ladders. At 4 years, they can catch a beach ball, use scissors, hop on either foot, feed the self with a fork, dress themselves, copy most letters, pour liquid without spilling, and brush their own teeth. At 5 years, they can skip and gallop in rhythm, clap, bang, sing in rhythm, copy difficult shapes and letters, climb trees, jump over things and use knife to cut, wash their face, and comb their hair. At 6 years, they can draw and paint recognizable images, write simple words, read a page of print, tie their own shoes, and catch a small ball. Gross motor skills. Specific skills. Brain maturation, motivation, and guided practice make gross motor skills possible. Influence of culture and locale is important here. Practice with the big kids. Ava is unable to stand as Carol Ann can in the bottom picture, but she is thrilled to be wearing a tutu in New York City Central Park with 230 other dancers in a highly organized attempt to break a record for the most ballerinas on point at the same moment. Motor skills are developing exactly the same way on the other side of the world, top as children in Beijing perform in ballet class. Setting the stage for motor development. Adults need to facilitate. And in that, I mean they create safe play spaces, they create time for play, they appropriate equipment for play, and facilitate having playmates. One good thought is how might increased urbanization hinder or help motor development? Increased urbanization would mean there were more people and more chances for all the things that adults could facilitate. Environmental hazards include pollutants. Pollutants harm young growing brains and bodies more than older developed ones. Pollutants are of particular concern for urban, low socioeconomic status children and impact asthma and other respiratory problems. Sources include hundreds of substances in the air, food, and water affecting brain and development, including carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, ozone, sulfur dioxide, black carbon, wood smoke, car exhaust, secondhand smoke, waste contamination, and lead. Why are environmental pollutants especially harmful in early life? Well, children consume more air, food, and water per pound of body weight, and their organs are still developing. What about testing? Complexity of many unstudied chemical combinations creates challenges for testing. Molecular level testing is only recently now available. Eliminating lead. Lead was identified as a poison a century ago. The U.S. finally banned lead in paint in 1978 and in automobile fuel in 1996. Children who are young, low SES, and or living in an old housing tend to have higher levels. Teenage involvement is impulsive. Violent crimes are linked to lead poisoning of the brain. Infants' brains absorb lead at a higher rate than adult brains, so lead's neurotoxicity is especially destructive to developing brains. Alright, continuing on with lead. Plumbism. This is lead poisoning. It's a composite of 157 brains of adults who, as children, had high lead levels in their blood, and it shows reduced brain volume. The red and yellow hotspots are all areas that are similar or that are smaller than areas of the normal brain. No wonder lead-exposed children have multiple intellectual and behavioral problems. Regulation has made a difference, but no lead level has proven to be risk-free. A tragic example. You might have heard since 2014 in Flint, Michigan, city officials changed municipal drinking water to the Flint River. This contaminated the water supply with chemicals that increased lead leaching from old pipes. Child blood lead levels increased dramatically, especially in low-income neighborhoods. Pictured here is Veronica Robinson. She is a University of Michigan nursing professor who volunteered to provide free lead testing for the children of Flint, Michigan. If 7-year-old Zionte's level is high, brain damage in early life will trouble him for his entire life. And apparently this is still a problem in Flint, Michigan, 6 years later. Ain't that something? All right, we talked about gross motor skills. Now we're going to talk about fine motor skills. Fine motor skills are more difficult to master. They involve small hand and finger movements, and they often involve both sides of the brain and are influenced by practice and maturation. Artistic expression. All forms of artistic expression blossom during early childhood, and every artistic domain skill gradually comes with practice and maturation. Artistic expression is correlated with later creative drawing, and adult encouragement, child practice, and developing technical skill all play a role. Cultural context and cohort differences influence expression, and that if a culture is not very artistic itself, then that will not influence children to also be that. And cohort is like peers. If your peers think it's cool, you will think it's cool. Injuries and abuse. Accidents. In all families of every income, ethnicity, and nation, parents want to protect their children while fostering their growth. More children die from accidental or deliberate violence than any specific disease. In the United States, 2 to 6-year-olds are at greater risk than slightly older children. Avoidable injury. Age-related dangers include falls, motor vehicle deaths, poison, fire, and drowning. Injury control or harm reduction includes safety services, such as car seats, bike helmets, safety containers for medications, and pool monitoring. Falls are more often fatal for the very young, under 24 months, and the very old, over 80. Motor vehicle deaths peak from ages 15 to 25. In developing nations, safety seats are required for children in cars. Helmets protect bike riders, and cities have sidewalks. But fatal accidents in early childhood often involve poison, fire, or drowning. Levels of injury prevention: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary prevention are actions that change overall background conditions to prevent some unwanted event or circumstance, such as injury, disease, or abuse. Secondary prevention includes actions that avert harm in a high-risk situation, such as stopping a car before it hits a pedestrian or installing traffic lights at dangerous intersections. Tertiary prevention includes actions such as immediate and effective medical treatment that are taken after an adverse event, such as illness, injury, or abuse occurs, and that are aimed at reducing the harm or preventing disability. Child maltreatment is the intentional harm to or avoidable endangerment of anyone under 18 years of age. Child abuse is the deliberate action that is harmful to a child's physical, emotional, or sexual well-being. Child neglect is the failure to meet the child's basic physical, educational, or emotional needs. Substantiated maltreatment is harm or endangerment that has been reported, investigated, and verified. Reported maltreatment is harm or endangerment about which someone has notified the authorities. Why is there a difference between reported versus substantiated cases of maltreatment? Each child is counted only once, so 5 verified reports about a single child result in 1 substantiated case. Substantiation requires proof. Many professionals are mandated reporters required to report any signs of possible maltreatment. Some reports are screened out, and a report may be false or deliberately misleading. Frequency of maltreatment. Reports have increased since 1950, but substantiated rates have decreased every year since 1990. There are fewer homes with many small children. There is a variation in the level of professional scrutiny related to abuse, and maltreatment may be underreported. Probably that last one's the most important. Warning signs in general include it is delayed development, which is slow growth, immature communication, lack of curiosity, and unusual social interactions. By early childhood, the signs are fearfulness, startled by noise, defensiveness, quick to attack, confused between fantasy and reality. These are also symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. There has been some trauma. Consequences of maltreatment. The effects of maltreatment are devastating and long-lasting. The child and the community are both affected. Maltreated and neglected children regard people as hostile and exploitative. They are less friendly, more aggressive, and more isolated than other children, and experience greater social deficits. They may experience large and enduring economic consequences and have higher risk of emotional disorders and suicide attempts. Continuing on with child maltreatment, there are 3 levels of prevention, just like I mentioned earlier: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary is a focus on macrosystem and exosystem. This includes stable neighborhood, family cohesion, decreasing financial instability, family isolation, and teenage parenthood. Secondary prevention has a focus on identifying and intervening in secure attachment. Tertiary prevention is a focus on limiting the harm after maltreatment. Think of it in terms of the first one is actually trying to prevent it, the second one is trying to deal with it as it is happening, and the third you can see it as healing from it. Tertiary prevention and placement, which is the healing part, as I mentioned. Permanency planning, an effort by child welfare authorities to find a long-term living situation that will provide stability and support for a maltreated child. A goal is to avoid repeated changes of caregiver or school, which can be particularly harmful to the child. There's also foster care, which is a legal, publicly supported system in which a maltreated child is removed from the parent's custody and entrusted to another adult or family, which is reimbursed for expenses incurred in meeting the child's needs. There's also kinship care. This is a form of foster care in which a relative of the maltreated child, usually a grandparent, becomes the approved caregiver. And also adoption. This is a legal proceeding in which an adult or a couple unrelated to the child is granted the joys and obligations of being that child's parent. And that wraps up Chapter 8. Thanks for listening.